probably went and, so just to capitalize on those a little bit more, the late night salivary cortisol test is actually done at midnight. I wrote in some, and again, this is all in that lab bed lecture, but I want to just say it right here. You test it at midnight. The person actually, you take the kit home and they wake themselves up and do it. And if you think about it, which it makes sense, when would your cortisol levels be the lowest?
When you're sleeping.
Right, because cortisol is our get up out of bed, let's go, let's get going with our day. You don't need it while you sleep. So that's why they do it, because if you wake up, do it at midnight when it should be low and it's through the roof, that helps you to, does that make sense? Yes. And then with the CRH test, because again, ACTH is also dependent on the time of the day, what the number should be. But 10 is like the lowest normal range. It goes all the way up to 60, ACTH, 10 to 60. It's your normal range. So what they're saying there in that bullet point, if you think about your independent versus dependent, if you give them CRH, you would hope that their ACTH would be suppressed. It should get lower because your body's like, I need to shut that off. Right? Does that make sense? But if it's an ACTH dependent cause, somewhere something's pumping out a lot of ACTH. So no matter how much CRH you give them, it's not going to shut the ACTH off. Does that make sense? Because it's getting pumped out from somewhere else. Whether it's a funky tumor or whatever. But if you give them CRH and it's an ACTH independent disease, it will suppress their ACTH. Because again, the issue's not ACTH being pumped out with those independent causes. It's a person taking a handful of steroids every day. So the body in the independent folks gets that CRH and it says, okay, I'm going to shut you down, ACTH, you're fine. Those cortisol levels are just extremely high because they're doing this business. Does that make sense? I just want you to, again, you'll have to read this, understand it later on, but I wonder, address that. And again, you know, I don't make you memorize lab numbers, but you will have to, like I said yesterday, look these lab numbers up to even understand what these tests mean, you know. And what's less than 10, what's greater than 10, what's that number? Well, you have to know that 10 to 60 is your range for ACTH. Okay. Any questions over that? So, primary hyperaldosteronism. So again, this is kind of the opposite of your Addison's disease. These folks are making too much of aldosterone. It exceeds the body's requirements and is relatively autonomous with regard to its normal chronic regulator, which is your renin-angiotensin system. This results in excessive sodium reabsorption via your sodium channels in the tubules, leading to what we see, which is hypertension and suppression of the renin-angiotensin system. It's your basic definition. So again, primary hyperaldosteronism is Conn's syndrome. So you've got Cushing's, you've got Addison's, now you got Conn's. Causes for it, there's several different ones. I didn't list them out because it's kind of the same business. Anything that can cause hyperplasia or issues with the adrenal gland to pump out too much of it. So it can be hyperplasia, or it can be actually an adenoma or a tumor that secretes it. So it's secondary to unilateral, it can actually be bilateral. I was looking at unilateral. Adenoma or hyperplasia. That's obviously not that glamorous, so I wouldn't run a test question over the pathophysiology of this disease. So signs and symptoms, again, the opposite of your JFK'er. It's the other way now. Because they're really making a lot of aldosterone. So they're really wanting to hold on to that sodium. And they're really wanting to get rid of that potassium in their urine. And as we already know, by this awesome drawing, water follows solute. So all that sodium's going back up in there and all that water's following it and their blood pressure's elevated. And that's why they're hypertensive. I'm sorry, yeah, hypertensive with low potassium. That's like a board type question. Patient comes in, and this hypertension is not controlled hypertension. Because again, you're throwing all this stuff at them. Now granted, it will eventually shut down the raw, I mean, you know, if you understand that, you give them the ACE and you give them this and you give them that. But if that aldosterone's coming from something funky, it's still going to be there. So these are people that are not getting controlled on 1, 2, 3. Yes, sir.
Why is there polyuria and polydipsia if they're retaining water?
Well, they're retaining it, but they also, it's got to go somewhere. They're peeing it out also. The water is following the solute. True, but they are peeing it out as well. They have to pee it out eventually. They can't just keep getting fluid collecting. They actually can, but they do pee a lot. Also, another component of that is kind of like, not to confuse you, but it can start to affect other layers. So they also will have an increase in their sugar as well. Potentially an increase in their sugar if it affects their glucocorticoid layer. Because so the sugar can cause the polyuria. It's no different than with a diabetic because they have polyuria because their increased solute is glucose. These folks have an increase, it could be the glucose, but their solute is sodium. Does that make sense at all? I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, did you ever think about why does a diabetic pee all the time?
It was explained that it's like beyond the renal threshold for glucose, and that's why they're peeing it off. That's
They're peeing out sugar, but what's
Right.
you're peeing a lot,
polyuria is increased volume, right?
right?
So I don't know. I guess it just
So why does
doesn't.
a diabetic pee a lot? Sure, they're spilling sugar because the threshold's too much, but why are they peeing a lot?
Oh.
Yeah, because the water follows solute. The solute can be anything. The solute can be sugar molecule, it can be sodium molecule, it can be, God, I'm sure there's others I just can't think of right now. So eventually that water's got to go somewhere, and they're going to pee it out a lot.
So these people are peeing out sodium.
They're peeing out water. The diabetic, you're getting confused. The diabetic, they pee a lot because of water follows solute, they got tons of sugar, yada, 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 yada.
Mm-hmm.
The glucose is spilling into the urine because there's a threshold for glucose to eventually, it's going to start going somewhere. It can't just be collected in the body forever. So you'll start to lose it in the urine. That's not really the same thing here. These people are peeing a lot because of the water solute, the sodium, but they're not so much peeing out sodium. It's not the same exactly.
I guess I just don't understand the mechanism of why they have increased volume of urine.
I think it's because they have increased thirst, so like if their blood osmolality is higher, then they're thirsty, trying to compensate for how concentrated their blood is,
And because they're peeing a lot.
and then they're peeing.
Kind of a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle, right. But the sugar in the urine being spilled is because it meets a threshold, which is independently of them peeing a ton. They're peeing a ton because they have all that sugar and the volume's just expanding and expanding. Yes, ma'am, sorry.
Is it because the water is falling with potassium that they're peeing out? That's why they're losing the volume?
Essentially, all of it's because their aldosterone is not at a normal level. And aldosterone, if it's way, way high, you're really, normally, this is the same thing Taylor and I were talking about the other day. I don't know what the normal threshold is for sodium and potassium loss in your urine, like on a normal, everyday, average person. But aldosterone kicks in a normal person. If they're hypotensive, it's like, God, I need to bump up my blood pressure. So it kicks in and it increases your sodium retention, so solute will follow it, your blood pressure will go up, and does that make sense? And your potassium, you've got to exchange those, they've got to exchange, you can't do both at the same time. It's kind of like when you're compensating in your acidosis or alkalosis. If you hold on to one, something's going to go away. And in this case, it just so happens to be potassium and sodium. I don't know how much potassium normally lives in your urine. I don't know. I don't know what a normal person loses. And I don't know what a normal person loses sodium-wise either. The volume for urination is secondary to water following some increased solute. That solute could be glucose, sodium, whatever. But you're not losing sodium in your urine here. Not to the level you're losing sugar in your urine as a diabetic. I'm sorry, I don't think I answered your question.
It's okay. I get what Sammy was saying about the osmolarity, but at the same time that they would be taking in sodium, they'd be taking in water, so
I
they
think it's
wouldn't be.
because the aldosterone is suppressed, so like they can't be getting rid of sodium in their pee because the mechanism is that their kidneys are keeping the sodium, and then that is
Yeah, their
higher.
aldosterone's not suppressed. Their aldosterone is through the roof.
So they're.
So they're really holding on to sodium.
For drinking, so then they're drinking so much that their volume is overloaded, so they're peeing, but their sodium is still high. So they're still thirsty, and it just like continues that way.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Sort of.
The way I understood it is when they take in sodium, they're also taking in water, so.
They're keeping water, right, so then if they just keep doing that, then their volume is high. So at some point, their blood pressure is gonna be so high and whatever, that their kidneys are gonna say, we have to get rid of volume.
Right.
So they're gonna pee,
So we're gonna get rid of free water.
but their sodium is still high.
It's
because
free
they're
water.
peeing.
Okay.
So then you still have a high concentration
Of sodium, so you're still
Gotta
thirsty,
have
so you're
water.
still drinking,
Okay.
and it just keeps
If you're
that
peeing,
way.
you're gonna drink because your body automatically starts to go, oh, I gotta drink, gotta drink.
All right, that makes sense.
But it also could be true also in this, because if it does affect that cortisol layer, they could have the glycosyl, they can have increased glucose as well. Physical exam, there's not a lot of weird skin changes. The biggest one is hypertension. I've seen one patient with this whenever I was a student on inpatient medicine, and that was his chief complaint, was hypertension. That's what he came in for, hypertension that could not be controlled. Now granted, you have obviously other symptoms that go along with hypertension, headache, changes in vision, epigastric pain if it's too severe, dizziness, but hypertension is what you need to know. So labs, If you were to order a CMP, we already kind of know this, hypernatremia, hypokalemia. You could get a serum ACTH, obviously, depending on where the problem was that was causing their increase, causing their issue, they would have an increase in it. And like I said 2 slides ago, because of this abnormal increase in your aldosterone, it will negative feedback loop try to suppress the ROS system, the renin-angiotensin system. Because again, it's like, whoa, slow down. So they'll try to feedback and suppress all those different steps in the renin-angiotensin system. Because an end product of that is to increase aldosterone. Does that make sense? Again, that's just a lab you order. It's a plasma renin activity. You can actually just order it just like that. And it will be a low number from whatever the normal range should be. There is a ratio that you can actually measure for Con syndrome. And it's essentially on like a lab form. It's renin aldosterone ratio. That's how you order it. Because in primary, what would your ratio be? What would you expect to see? Potentially, let's say, what would you expect to see? What would your ratio be? What would your aldosterone be? Okay, what would renin be? Low. It could potentially be super, yeah. Bless you. If you do believe that someone has the adrenal hyperplasia, you are going to do a CT scan of their abdomen to look at their adrenal glands. Especially if you think that, you want to make sure it's not a malignancy that's causing it. The 4th bullet point is just explaining the ratio. An important thing is the person, you have to be careful if you're on a hypertensive medication. Because again, if any of those meds are altering that pathway, you have to take that into account. Most of these individuals have to have their adrenal glands, the area that's hyperplasia, they have to have it removed. But then, of course, like I mentioned previously, if you take it away, you're going to have to replace whatever's not there. So majority of these individuals do spironolactone. Now, it can get more in-depth than that. And again, Dr. Latassi will go into the specifics. That's the basic one that you normally do, because most people have pretty bad hyperplasia with Con syndrome. Those are the differentials. Essential hypertension, you could, but most individuals, unless they're just completely non-compliant, are able to control with 2 to 3 to 4 blood pressures, medications. But your secondary hypertension, absolutely, because your secondary hypertension are all your funky causes for blood pressure changes that you need to work up. That's why when you have someone that you don't think is just an everyday primary or essential hypertension, you do have to work them up for several endocrinopathies to make sure that's not what's causing their high blood pressure. FeO being one of them. Complications, again, as you already know from your previous CARDS course, anytime you put that extra blood pressure on your body, it can cause a lot of bad mojo. So you have to worry about stroke, myocardial infarction, which is always a heart, or myocardial infarction, heart failure, because increased pressure on it will eventually start to stretch. AFib, why AFib? Yeah, it's electrolytes. Potassium that gets out of whack can really mess with the heart's electrical conductivity. Any questions about that? Again, if you find yourself having difficulty answering those objectives, or you want me to review your objectives with you, please come and find me. I'll help you. I absolutely do not mind whatsoever. That's what I'm here for. I don't mind at all. You guys. What do y'all have for the rest of the day? Have a bananas? Yeah.
Fine.
Fine. Okay. Awesome.
It's weird for me since we separated all of the FEMA, like amenorrhea, all that kind of stuff, I'm not connecting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because now I've like compartmentalized it, but we're learning mail and all of that. We need to like void it in here.